Son of the Storm Dragon by Ashton K. 423. Ren Daisuke thought my unconventional life would end after years of working in special forces and CIA. So imagine my surprise when I died and reincarnated as a dragon of all things in this world, filled with magic and monsters. This is the story of my adventures in the greatest journey of all time, under the new name Rimuru Tempest, Tensura AU. Chapter 28. Fairy of the Labyrinth. The world was a nauseating blur of blue and green for Rimuru, as he was taken for the wildest, most terrifying ride of his life by none other than Malim Nava. The pink-haired demon lord shot across the skies at speeds that broke the sound barrier. The wind pressure from her flight speed was so intense that it actually began to damage Rimuru, forcing him to turn into his dragon hatchling form to make himself smaller and actively keep up a multi-layer barrier to prevent further damage. Malim had adjusted her grip accordingly, cradling him in her arms as she flew even faster, much to his dismay. Wahahaha! Isn't this fun, Rimuru? We're going so fast! Malim's gleeful shout was a stark contrast to the reality of the situation. Rimuru could only watch as the land beneath him was nothing but a blur, their speed too fast for him to process anything. At the speed she was moving, Malim could easily cross several nations within minutes. Despite being held gently in Malim's surprisingly gentle yet ironclad grip, Rimuru did not share her enthusiasm. He only had so much energy to spare, and keeping up the barrier was eating up his magicules at a rate that surprised even him. It was terrifying to think that just by flying, Malim could put Rimuru in a position where his life may be in danger. "No, Malim, I'm not having fun," Rimuru shouted through telepathy. "Try slowing down a little, otherwise you might actually kill me." Wahahaha! Stop being such a crybaby. You seem just fine to me. Malim laughed, completely oblivious to his suffering. Maybe you just haven't gotten used to it yet. If that's the case, then I should go even faster. Wah! No. What kind of logic is that? Rimuru protested, but his words fell on deaf ears. The next thing he knew, the pressure from before increased as Malim's velocity rapidly rose. Warning! Magicule consumption has increased. Crap! I really hope we're almost there, Rimuru thought to himself. And thus, Rimuru was put in a position where there was nothing he could do but hold on, and try to hold out until they arrived at their destination. Fortunately for him, his break arrived sooner than he thought. Within a few more minutes of high-speed flight, Malim began to slow down before coming to a halt. Rimuru took a moment to breathe. Surprisingly, his magicules were only a little under half his total capacity, which was a lot more than he thought he'd have. "All right, we're here," Malim said, prompting Rimuru to look down. They were currently hovering above a large forest, with a gigantic tree right in front of them. The tree was far larger than anything Rimuru had seen since coming to this world. It was much larger than the trees he had seen within the Dryad's domain as well. At the bottom of the tree was a large double door. It looked strong and ancient, as if it had been there for many millennia. "Malim, where are we? And what are we doing here?" Rimuru asked. This hardly looked like the place where they could just duke it out without worrying about the surroundings or the environment. "We're in the Republic of Ulgracia, or something like that, and we're here to visit a friend of mine, a fellow demon lord. She'll be able to help us with the perfect place to train," Malim declared with a proud grin plastered on her face, as if she owned the place. The Republic of Ulgracia. He remembered some information that Kaijin had told him about. Rimuru, trying to familiarize himself with the global map of the Cardinal World and its nations, had asked Kaijin to tell him what he knew. Sui had also been there at the time, wanting to gather as much information about the world beyond Jura. According to Kaijin, the Republic of Ulgracia was a rather small nation, even smaller than the likes of Blumend. But they did have one unique trait that set them apart from most nations, and that was the fact that almost every individual in the nation was an elementalist. Meaning, they were bound to elemental spirits and could call upon their power. The people of Ulgracia were loved by the spirits, and thus it had become a tradition for one to summon a spirit at the age of 10. This alone earned them some level of respect. The country was located along the coast of the larger sorceress dynasty of Sarayan, and was said to be outside of the influence of the Western Holy Church and the Western Council. "You see that big tree over there?" Malim said as she pointed at the large tree with the double doors on it. "That's the dwelling of spirits, and my friend Ramiris owns that place. Come on, let's go say hi." Before Rimuru could even question Malim or protest to anything, the pink-haired demon lord swooped down right towards the two large doors. The wind shrieked past them, a physical force that pressed Rimuru deeper into Malim's arms. They rapidly approached the two large and ancient doors, well decorated with swirling patterns and clearly designed for grandeur. And yet, Malim showed no signs of slowing down as they approached them. "Malim, wait. Doors are for opening, not." His words were swallowed by a deafening boom. With a gleeful "Hiya!" Malim threw her fist forward, glowing with her pink aura, and connected with the center of the massive gate. For a second, there was a moment of absolute silence, as if the doors were resisting the destructive force of the destroyer. Then, with a loud groan, the doors exploded inwards. Large splinters blasted into the chambers beyond, and a shockwave of displaced air and magic erupted outward. "Ramiris, guess who's here? And I brought a friend, too," Malim said cheerfully, hovering in the gaping, splintered hole she had just created as though she had knocked politely. Rimuru, still cradled in her arms, looked at the carnage beneath them and let out an exasperated sigh. They hadn't even met this Ramiris yet, and Malim was already breaking her stuff. How she expected to ask for favors when she was this rude was beyond Rimuru. Then again, with Malim's strength, she could pretty much get away with almost anything, depending on who her target was. The interior of the dwelling of spirits made Rimuru's eyes widen in awe. The space inside was significantly larger than the space of the tree on the outside. The area was dark, lit by motes of flickering and moving lights that, upon deeper analysis, Rimuru realized were actually small, tiny fairies that were flying around the place. Though they seemed to be flying away from him and Malim, the sky above seemed endless, lit by what appeared to be stars, making it no different than the night skies of the real world. "What the heck is this place? It's like we've entered a whole other world." Rimuru wondered in awe. Even the air of the place was different, and the amount of magicules in the air was significantly lower. Answer: that is not too far from the truth. Master has entered an isolated space that is distinct from the real world. Another dimension, in other terms. That's incredible. This Ramiris must be pretty powerful to create a space this large and detailed, Rimuru thought. The only other time he had seen something remotely close was when he went to visit the Tengu village, which was located in a pocket dimension at the peak of the Kusha Mountains. It was a testament to Keed's abilities at the height of her power that she'd been able to achieve such a feat. But at the end of the day, it paled in comparison to what Rimuru was seeing now. According to Great Sage, what Keed had done was simply cut off a small fabric of reality from the rest of the world, creating a bubble of space around the designated area and thereby putting it in another dimension, while on the outside, space folded to make up for the missing area. But the place they were in now, the dwelling of spirits, was not a space cut off from reality, but a reality that had been created from nothing, which was, in a way, more terrifying to think about. What kind of power would be required to create a whole new dimension? Aha! Malim! Rimuru's thoughts were cut off by a loud shriek, followed by a small golden glow flying rapidly towards them. It zoomed right past them and stopped right in front of the large, broken doors. "What did you do to my door? Do you know how long it takes to build a door like that? Do you?" The golden orb zoomed right into Malim's face, and it was only when it was close enough that Rimuru was finally able to get a good look at what it was. Surprisingly, it was a tiny figure, no bigger than his human-sized hand, with translucent wings that were beating furiously, and a golden glow that surrounded her form. It was another fairy, though this one was surprisingly dressed in a Gothic-style dress, her blonde hair tied up into 2 elaborate drills. "Wahahaha! Hey there, Ramiris! It's been a while." Malim casually greeted the fairies, or rather Ramirises, complaints going over her ears completely. "Say, do you think you could help me out with something? Hey, don't just ignore me when I'm talking to you." Ramiris yelled in frustration as she began to erratically fly around Malim's head, kicking and pulling at her pink locks. This had absolutely no effect on Malim. Her gestures, while carrying the full weight of her fury and frustration, had the impact of a fly. You always do this. You barge in, break my stuff, and ask for favors. I've had it. I'm the queen of spirits, a demon lord just like you. The least you could do is show some respect. Why though? You're much weaker than I am, Malim countered ruthlessly with childlike innocence. Even Rimuru couldn't help but flinch at that blunt truth. He had noticed it too, from his position in Malim's arms. This fairy, despite being confirmed as a demon lord and a friend of Malim, didn't seem to have a particularly large reservoir of power. She was, for all intents and purposes, weak as Malim had put it. And yet, despite that, she had still managed to create a space as large as this. There was something Rimuru was missing, and until he figured that out, he would assume she was stronger than what his magic sense led him to believe. Still though, listening to the bickering of these two demon lords was really lowering his opinion of the station. They were both far from the evil, world-destroying entities that Rimuru had envisioned when he heard the term demon lord. On one hand, Malim's power was undeniable, but she was a childish and easily excitable individual. And Ramiris, not only did she seem weak, but her personality was almost as childish and loud as that of Malim. Rimuru, cradled in Malim's arm, watched as the two of them continued to bicker for a while longer. It got so bad to the point where they had even forgotten why they were arguing in the first place. At that point, Rimuru had enough. His ears literally could not take much more, and so he squirmed his way out of Malim's grip and jumped onto the ground, assuming his human form as he did so. Huh? Who's this guy? Are you bringing strays to my labyrinth now? Ramiris asked in curiosity as she turned her attention to Rimuru. Rimuru's eyebrow twitched involuntarily at the insult. She hadn't even noticed him until a second ago, and the first thing she calls him is a stray. Ah, I almost forgot to introduce you. Malim shouted in excitement as she gestured towards Rimuru. No, you totally did forget, Rimuru thought with a deadpan. This is my cousin, Rimuru. He's the new guardian and ruler of the great forest of Jura, Malim introduced with a proud grin. He's pretty strong too, definitely stronger than you, so don't look down on him. Cousin? What the heck are you talking about, Malim? Ramiris wondered in shock as she took a closer look at Rimuru. She inspected him further, flying around him and looking him up and down. As she did so, a sudden image overshadowed Rimuru. Standing in his place was a male figure that looked remarkably similar to Rimuru, except older and more mature. The individual had a slender build, a pale complexion, and long, starry, midnight black hair resembling the night sky in physical form that reached his lower back. He had glowing golden eyes that seemed to gaze into the soul, yet they held nothing but warmth and compassion. Just as suddenly as it appeared, the image vanished, and Rimuru was the one standing before her once more. Her head suddenly began to ache terribly, and she couldn't even hold onto the details of what she just saw. Ugh. What was that? I saw something just now. Ramiris pondered as she brought her hand to her aching head. She didn't know what it was. She couldn't remember. But whatever it was had been caused by this cousin of Malim. Hey, are you okay? The voice of Rimuru snapped her out of her distressed thoughts, his expression a concerned frown. Even Malim seemed worried as she looked at Ramiris. I'm fine. Ramiris snapped back as she folded her arms in front of her in an attempt to save face. It's just dealing with Malim that's always giving me a headache. That's all. Yeah, that's definitely it, she added as she pointed an accusatory finger towards the pink-haired demon lord. Rimuru didn't seem quite convinced, but he wasn't really in a position to question her further about it. It wasn't like he knew Ramiris on a personal level, and they had only just met. He didn't want to come off as nosy. Oh, that's good. I thought you might have seriously gotten hurt for a second there. Malim chipped in as her bright smile returned, not even bothered by Ramiris's complaints. Anyway, Ramiris, about that favor. Malim, wait, It's clear that Ramiris is experiencing some discomfort. How about a snack first before we continue talking? Rimuru cut in. The last thing he wanted was for Malim to continue angering Ramiris when they clearly needed something from her. Rimuru already had a few ideas as to what Malim wanted, and if he was right, then they had to do it right. Otherwise, Ramiris was bound to refuse. Thank you. At least one of you seems to have a brain. Ramiris huffed as she crossed her arms once more and turned away from the two of them. She then turned her head slightly towards Rimuru, looking at him from the corner of her left eye. Since you brought snacks, I'll at least hear you out. But they better be good. And just like that, Rimuru was sharing a meal with yet another boisterous and loud demon lord. A while later, the three of them could be seen seated on a blanket that had been laid out on the ground, with some food in the form of cookies, cake, and other sweet snacks laid out with some juice or water. Ramiris and Malim were both awed by the spread that was presented before them, with Malim accusing Rimuru of holding out on her back in Tempest. Of course, there was no way he was going to tell her that these were his snacks that Shuna had prepared for him in advance for whenever he went to handle affairs away from the capital. Still, it was going towards a supposedly good cause, so he didn't mind sharing. He could always ask Shuna to make more when she found the time. As the three of them sat and began to eat, Ramiris began to ask questions, the first and most obvious being the relation between him and Malim. Rimuru explained what he could about his heritage, though he didn't delve too deep into the whole story of his origins. He spoke of his mother, the storm dragon Velridia, his birth almost a year ago, and his recent rise to being the chancellor of the forest and ruler of monsters. As he spoke, Ramiris floated silently as she ate a cookie that was no doubt larger than her whole body. And yet, Rimuru could tell she was paying attention to every word he was saying. Her eyes were fixed on him, and her earlier attitude was replaced by an almost unnerving focus. The playful motes of light that were the lesser fairies had long since vanished, retreating into the depths of the chamber and leaving the three of them alone. So, Velridia's kid, huh? Ramiris finally said as she took another bite out of the large cookie she had, holding it with both hands. You know, I never expected Velridia to be the next true dragon to have a child, especially considering her history. If anything, I would have bet on Velgrind, considering she's been married for eons now. Bet Guy and Velzard would lose their heads if they heard that Velridia got knocked up. Ha ha, who's the father? Kid. Not sure, I never got to speak to my mother long before she vanished, Rimuru responded, his eyebrow twitching slightly at the dig. And, if possible, I'd like to keep my existence from reaching too many ears for the time being. What are you talking about? Malim asked as she turned to Rimuru. Some of the demon lords already know you're my cousin. It's only a matter of time before the rest of them know. Just because something could happen eventually doesn't mean it should be done immediately, Malim. It's just a stalling tactic whilst my nation develops and I get stronger. My heritage alone could draw a lot of attention to me, and all those connected to me, Rimuru said firmly. Well, you're certainly right about that. You're the most interesting thing to happen to this world in centuries. You'll certainly have the attention of most of the demon lords when they find out about you, Ramiris agreed. Wahahaha. That's why he has to get a lot stronger before then, Malim said as she turned to Ramiris once more with an excited grin. So Ramiris, do you think you can build a labyrinth for us to train in Rimuru's country? Tempest? What? Malim, do you have any idea how much energy it even takes to build a labyrinth? Ramiris asked as she began to fly around the area rapidly in distress and anger. And you want to use it so you and your cousin can just go around fighting and destroying stuff? Are you trying to kill me? Don't worry about the small stuff, Ramiris. I can provide the energy for building the labyrinth and even repairing it while we train. As long as it's small, you should be able to maintain it, right? Malim said with a laugh, as though Ramiris's concerns were nothing but a minor inconvenience for her. Well, even if you say that, you can't just come here, ask me to close my current labyrinth, and go and create another one, Ramiris shouted back. Why not? It's not like you have any friends here. All you do is lock yourself up in here and play with your dolls. Malim's brutal, yet innocent, Honesty struck harder than any physical blow. Rimuru could tell there was some truth to her words due to how Ramras's face went red with both anger and humiliation. "Why, you little Lady Ramiris?" Rimuru intervened before yet another quarrel could begin between the two of them. It was time to take the diplomatic route and be the adult in this situation. "I would have preferred if Malim phrased it better, but I would also be grateful if you would consider her proposal. Malim is just a little bit excited having found out about having a cousin and all. So I hope you'll excuse her behavior and rudeness." "Humph, Malim is always like that, so I'd hardly call it anything new. Though she does seem a bit pushier than usual," Ramiris said with a huff as she turned away from Malim and focused on Rimuru. "All right then, Rimuru, since you seem like the more civilized of the two of you." "Hey, what's in it for me?" Ramiris asked, completely ignoring Malim's offended cries. "Creating a labyrinth is no simple task, even for someone as great as I," she said proudly. "I didn't expect it to be. It's an extremely useful and powerful ability, one worthy of being wielded by a demon lord," Rimuru praised. The praise landed with the intended effect. Ramiris, who had been floating with a haughty pout, visibly puffed out her chest, her wings beating a little faster and a smug grin plastered on her face. "That being said, I think we can come up with a mutually beneficial deal." "I'm listening," Ramiris said as she tried to pretend not to be interested. "I'm currently building a rapidly developing nation within the Great Forest of Jura, and I'd like to make use of your labyrinth there. I already have a few projects in mind, some of which I'm sure you would enjoy. Naturally, I don't expect you to do this for free," Rimuru said as he leaned forward. "For the duration of your stay, you would be an honored guest of the Rimuru Tempest Federation, with your own residence, access to all the best cuisines and foods, and a resource budget and small dedicated team for any research and projects that you want to carry out." As Malim said, she would provide the energy needed to create the labyrinth. "We'll have a trial period that lasts for as long as Malim and I use the labyrinth for training. After that, the choice of whether you choose to remain in Tempest or not will be up to you." Ramiris's wings, which had been fluttering with agitated energy, slowed down to a gentle hum. She floated in place, arms crossed and eyes closed as she carefully considered the offer being made to her. She had to admit, it was a tempting offer, and more than she had expected. Not only would she get to build a brand new labyrinth, but she would be able to pursue her spirit engineering passion and would even have her own team. Plus, she would no longer live in self-isolation. While she loved the company of the spirits and fairies of the labyrinth, many of them were of lower rank, and thus not fully sentient. As annoying as Malim was, Ramiris did appreciate her constant unannounced visits, even if she would never tell the pink-haired dragonoid. But most importantly, she would be able to eat more of this delicious food. Ramiris couldn't remember the last time she had eaten such tasty snacks before. If these snacks were anything to go by, then Rimuru's nation must have lots of delicious food. And in the event of the worst-case scenario, she had an out. The so-called trial period would last for as long as Rimuru and Malim trained together. After that, Ramiris could leave Tempest if she didn't like it or stay if she did. Ahem. Ramiris coughed into her hand after a moment, trying to regain some composure, but the fluttering of her wings behind her gave away her excitement. "That sounds like a good deal, but I have a few conditions of my own," she said as she raised her index finger. "Name them," Rimuru stated patiently. "I'll get to pick where I put the gate to my labyrinth. It can't just be anywhere. It has to be somewhere awesome and worthy of its greatness," Ramiris declared, to which Rimuru nodded his head. "I can work with that. I can show you a few spots, and you can pick out which one you like most," Rimuru said. "Awesome. Next, I'll pick out my own research team. I won't have some random oafs messing up my delicate works. They need to be worthy of my genius." "Done. We have many skilled artisans in Tempest that I'm sure would be more than honored to learn from someone of your caliber." Ramiris's grin widened at his response, but she wasn't done yet. She spun and pointed a tiny, accusatory finger at Malim. "And third, you, Malim, you have to promise not to smash everything after the labyrinth is done. Show some restraint." "Wahahaha. Don't worry, I'll hold back a bit. The whole point is to train Rimuru, right? I can't do that if I kill him with one punch every time. He won't learn anything even if you revive him, Malim said with a hearty laugh. Though Rimuru wasn't laughing. He suddenly felt a dark pit form in his stomach as he processed Malim's words. Wait, what? What do you mean, revive? Rimuru asked, though he was already dreading the answer that he would get. Oh, that. Ramiris has the ability to revive anyone who dies in her labyrinth. Meaning there's no need to hold back in our training. Malim cheerfully answered, much to Rimuru's horror. Excuse me. You never mentioned anything about me outright dying during this training, Rimuru exclaimed in shock. Rimuru was by no means afraid of death, his past life in special forces having taught him to be prepared to die at any moment. But that didn't mean he was keen on going through that kind of experience again. He had already died once, and was not willing to go through something like that again. But Rimuru had already dug his own grave when he pretty much got Ramiris to agree to making the labyrinth in Tempest. There was no going back now, so that meant the only thing he could do was move forward, and hopefully not die too many times. Though given the gap between him and Malim, and her nature in general, he could expect more than a few deaths by the time they were done. At the very least, he was confident that this kind of brutal, murderous training would produce results, but even he wondered if the cost would be worth the gain. Despite his reservations and reluctance, Rimuru eventually sighed and gave in. He was probably going to hate himself in the near future, but that was a problem for future Rimuru. Pulling away now would most likely be far more disastrous anyway. Besides, Malim had put in the effort and taken all the necessary precautions just by coming here to ask Ramiris. She'd found a location where they didn't have to worry about destroying anything, and she didn't have to worry about accidentally crippling or killing him, which Rimuru hated to admit was a very real possibility in this scenario. He figured the least he could do was give it a try. Worst case scenario, he could just pull out. You know what? Never mind. I'm already neck deep, so let's just do it. Rimuru resigned with a sigh. That's the spirit, Malim said with a laugh as she slapped his back with enough force to make him stumble forward. Since Ramiris has agreed to come with us, that means we can go back now, right? Rimuru instantly sat up, alarmed at the thought of another horrific ride like the one he had endured earlier. Yes, but I'll teleport us back this time. No way I'm letting you fly me anywhere for a long while. Ah, but why? I thought you said you had fun. Malim asked as she crossed her arms with a pout. I remember explicitly telling you that I was not having fun. If I hadn't erected my barriers, I'm very positive you could have killed me with how fast you were moving. Rimuru shot back with a glare at Malim. Malim didn't look the least bit apologetic, though, merely turning her head away with her tongue sticking out the corner of her mouth and her right hand rubbing the back of her head. Really? I don't think I heard something like that. I can't really remember, Malim said with a nervous laugh as she kept her gaze away from Rimuru. Sure. Let's go with that, Rimuru said with an exasperated sigh. He then turned towards Ramiris, who had gone back to stuffing her mouth with a cookie 3 times her size. Ramiris, is there anything you want to pack before we go? Ramiris looked up from her snack and took on a thinking expression before eventually shrugging. Not really. Any stuff I have of worth in my current labyrinth will simply reappear when I make a new one in your country. Ha! Well, that's certainly convenient, Rimuru said as his gaze lingered on Ramiris for a moment longer. On the surface, she was weak. There was no denying that much. Her magical presence was almost negligible, and she clearly didn't possess any physical prowess, judging by her form. And yet, despite that, the more Rimuru learned about her labyrinth abilities, the more he realized that she was, in fact, someone powerful, at least within her domain. Were her powers strictly limited to the dwelling of spirits since she was the Queen of Spirits? Was she hiding her true strength? He was curious, but he supposed he could wait until they were more comfortable around each other before asking more questions. Either way, he had gained a valuable ally in her, and her labyrinth ability was invaluable. He hoped she would decide to stay after all was said and done. Great Forest of Jura, Rimuru City. The sun was setting by the time they returned to Rimuru City. Rimuru, Ramiris, and Malim appeared on the paved plaza directly in front of the government building, a magic circle glowing beneath their feet before fading away. Rimuru, not wanting to go for another life or death ride with Malim, had transported them via spatial movement after all was said and done. It was a much faster and safer option, in his opinion. "We're back," Rimuru said to himself. Honestly, he had some concerns about just getting up and leaving as he had done. Not that he had a choice when he had been literally whisked away. But it seemed things had turned out more or less fine. Everyone seemed to be going about their business as usual. "Wow, so this is your nation, huh, Rimuru?" Ramiris asked as she looked around, impressed by the structure and diversity of it all. "I don't think I've ever seen so many different types of monsters in one place before, let alone living and working together like this." "Told you it was pretty cool," Malim said with a smug grin, as if it were her own place. Before Rimuru could open his mouth to respond, a flurry of movement at the repaired entrance of the government building caught his eye. A group of figures rushed out of the building, their expressions a mixture of relief and worry. At the forefront was none other than Shuna, her hands clasped in front of her with a relieved smile on her face. But another figure moved faster. A blur of purple and black shot past Shuna. "Lord Rimuru." The world became a sudden cocoon of softness and the familiar scent of Cheyenne. She had wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace, lifting him off his feet and pulling him away from the surprised duo of demon lords with a fierce, protective possessiveness. "Are you all right, my lord?" Lady Shuna said you had been kidnapped by that pink-haired devil. Cheyenne growled, her eyes glaring daggers over Rimuru's head at Malim. "That's not what I said," Shuna said with a sigh as she approached the scene. Benimaru walked beside her with Geld, Rigard, Akatsuki, Hakuru, and a few others behind them. "Hey, no fair. I found him first," Malim protested with puffed cheeks as she glared at Cheyenne, her hands planted firmly on her hips. She was acting as if somebody had just stolen her favorite toy. "Lady Malim," Shuna said. Her usually sweet and gentle voice took on a firm tone that caused Malim, and even Ramiris, to flinch. "I understand that you were excited to meet Lord Rimuru, but you cannot just snatch the leader of our nation and fly away with him. It would cause a lot of panic and people would worry, such as what happened today." Rimuru finally managed to squirm enough for Cheyenne to loosen her grip, allowing him to pull back from her generous bust and plant his feet back on the ground. He then walked towards Shuna and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder before turning to a nervous Malim. "She's right, Malim. It was a bit reckless," Rimuru said. Malim had the decency to at least look guilty, meaning that she understood she had done wrong. Rimuru then turned back toward Cheyenne with a reassuring smile. "And don't worry, Cheyenne, I'm fine. Malim didn't kidnap me, Percy. She was just really excited to show me something, or rather, to introduce me to someone." Rimuru then gestured towards Ramiris. The eyes of all present turned towards the small fairy that was hovering next to Malim. The sudden attention was enough to make Ramiris feel a little self-conscious as she laughed nervously and began to fidget on the spot. "Oh yeah, this is my friend Ramiris. She's a demon lord just like me," Malim introduced happily, her mood instantly bouncing back from her earlier reprimand. The sudden introduction from Malim was like a trigger to Ramiris. Instantly, she shook off her nerves and flew a little higher until she was in front of everyone. "That's right. My name is Ramiris, Pixie of the Labyrinth, Queen of Spirits, and one of the 10 great demon lords," Ramiris declared grandly, a hand against her puffed-out chest and a smug grin on her face, as if waiting for the praise and awe that would come from her revelation. Benimaru and the others glanced at each other for a moment before looking back at Ramiris. The titles she had spouted off were no doubt impressive, but the source they were coming from was a bit underwhelming. "Hey, all of you were probably thinking something rude just now," Ramiris shouted as she pointed her hands at the crowd, her wings beating faster in agitation. "I'll have you know that despite my small size, I really am a demon lord." Rimuru, seeing the justified skepticism in his subordinate's eyes, stepped forward and decided to speak on her behalf. Alright, I get why you guys have your doubts, but Ramiris really is a demon lord, and she definitely has the talent to prove it. To that end, Ramiris and Malim are going to be staying in Tempest as guests for the foreseeable future. So, I expect everyone to show them their due respect and our hospitality. Understood. Yes, my lord. If Lord Rimuru said that the tiny golden fairy was, in fact, the demon lord Ramiris, then they had no reason to deny it any further. And so, they all accepted it as the truth and moved forward with the knowledge that they had two demon lords now living in their city. Great. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but after the day I've had, I think I've earned myself some rest and relaxation. Fortunately, Sumayur's little side project should be finished by now. Rimuru thought as he stretched his arms over his head and began making his way into the administrative building. Later that evening, the newly completed hot springs of Rimuru City were shrouded in a thick, comforting steam that carried the scent of cedar wood and the natural minerals of spring water. Lanterns cast a soft, warm glow on the polished stones and tranquil water, creating a sanctuary of peace after a day of chaos. On the women's side of the high bamboo wall, the atmosphere was anything but tranquil. Splash! Wahahaha! I won again, one horn! Malim's triumphant shout echoed as she surfaced from beneath the water, a slightly dazed Cheyenne emerging a moment before. The two of them were playing around, having a breath-holding contest. Unacceptable! One more round, Cheyenne demanded, her competitive spirit burning brighter than ever. And my name is Cheyenne. Yeah, whatever. Bring it on. If you want to lose again, I don't mind. Malim shot back with a grin. And with that, the two of them took a deep breath and dove back beneath the surface of the water. Shuna sighed from her position at the edge of the bath. She took one of the small buckets, scooped some water, and poured it on her shoulders. Honestly, it's as if those two never tire, she said to Sumayur, who was beside her with a small smile on her face, alongside Sauka and Ariel. It is lively, Sumayur commented, her cheeks slightly pink from the steam. She was still getting used to the idea that the little girl in front of her was none other than the famed destroyer Malim Nava, and even more so that she was related to Rimuru. Thank you again for inviting me. Shuna. I wasn't aware Geld had finished with the hot springs, she replied with a grateful smile. No thanks are necessary. If anything, we should be the ones thanking you. From what Lord Rimuru told me, this whole thing was your idea. And it was only thanks to your efforts that it was able to come to fruition, Shuna said with a soft smile. Besides, we're friends, aren't we? It's only natural that I would invite you. Hey, could you two cut it out? Ramiris shouted at Malim and Cheyenne, who had burst from beneath the water once more, splashing water everywhere. Ramiris was currently laying in one of the hot spring buckets, floating along the surface. With her, surprisingly, was none other than Trainee, who had appeared at some point during the hot spring session and began fawning over Ramiris. Lady Ramiris, please do make sure to properly wash this spot as well, Trainee said with a beaming smile as she began to wash Ramiris with her bare hands. The way her fingers moved caused Ramiris to squirm and laugh at the ticklish sensation. On the men's side of the bath, the atmosphere was much more serene. The low murmur of conversation mingled with the gentle lapping of the water. Rimuru leaned back against a smooth, warm rock, letting out a sigh of contentment as he let the water soothe his tense muscles. He took a drink from the small cup of sake he had, a bottle of which, along with several cups, sat inside a hot spring bucket floating in the water. With him in the bath were Geld, Sui, Benimaru, Rito, and Gobta. Geld was shoulder deep in the water, his eyes closed as he enjoyed the moment of peace. Benimaru and Sui sat together, quietly discussing something in a low tone. Gobta and Rito were a little less serene, however. Hey, Rito, Gobta whispered as he scooted closer to the young otherworlder, a mischievous glint in his eyes. You hear all that splashing and yelling? The girls' side sounds like they're having way more fun. You think if we stack up, we could get a little peek over the wall? Rito, for all his mannerisms and practically good behavior, was still a boy in his late teens. His cheeks flushed at the implications, but he hesitated for a moment before shaking his head, his rational mind winning over his teen hormones. "No way, Gapta," Rito said in a hushed shout. "Don't even try it. Half the women on that side could kill us easily. Come on, Rito, don't be a coward. Fortune favors the bold. And on the other side of this wall is paradise. We'll just be taking a little peek." Before Gapta could even finish, a wave of killing intent so sharp and cold that it felt like 1,000 icy needles suddenly flooded the men's side of the bath. Slowly, Gapta and Rito turned their heads towards the source. What met them were the unforgiving, eerily glowing, slit green eyes of Rimuru, who was staring at them with a fixed, cold glare that would have been enough to kill a lesser being if he wanted to. "Gapta, for your sake, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear anything. I'm going to pretend that you forgot that my wife and your queen is on the other side of that wall. Because any other alternative." Rimuru let the threat and implications hang in the air. "Are right. It was just a joke. Ha ha ha," Gapta squeaked as he began to sweat bullets. He looked to the others for some kind of support, but Benimaru's eyes were burning with a righteous fury that promised a slow and painful death. Sui's gaze was colder than even Rimuru's, a promise of a body that would never be found. And lastly, Geld was just looking at Gapta in disappointment. "A totally bad, not at all funny joke. Please forgive me." The intense, cold pressure vanished as quickly as it came. Rimuru let out a sigh as he leaned his head back once more, though Gapta could not shake the feeling that he was still under heavy watch. "For your own health, I suggest you never make jokes like that again." Benimaru simply grunted in agreement, the fire in his eyes receding. In that moment, Gapta let out a breath of air he hadn't been holding, and Rito patted him on the back. Gapta had learned a very valuable lesson that night. Note to self: never, ever, talk about peeking in front of Lord Rimuru, especially if Lady Shuna is on the other side. After the baths, the steam gave way to the cool air of the night. Rimuru found his key subordinates and counsel within one of the bathhouse's private lounges. The room was serene, filled with soft tatami mats, low wooden tables, cushions, and the scent of freshly brewed tea. Already seated in the room were his wife and queen, Shuna, his advisors, Hakuru, Trainee, Keed, and Akatsuki, his general, Benimaru, his spy master, Sui, as well as Cheyenne, Geld, Ariel, Gabaru, Rigard, Kaijin, and Kataki. Their expressions were a mixture of post-bath relaxation and the underlying seriousness of the matter at hand. Rimuru took his seat at the head of the low table, accepting the cup of tea poured for him by Haruna with a grateful nod. The playful tension from the bath seemed to settle down into the more focused atmosphere of a council meeting. "I know you all have questions and concerns. It's only natural," Rimuru began, his voice calm and measured as his gaze washed over all 14 individuals in the room. "And so I won't beat around the bush. I'd prefer you hold back any questions you have until I'm done speaking." After receiving nods of confirmation from everyone, Rimuru began to recount the events that occurred from the very beginning. He spoke of Malim's arrival, her overwhelming prowess, and the shocking revelation of their familial connection as cousins through the true dragon lineage. He then detailed the chaotic trip to the dwelling of spirits, his meeting with Demon Lord Ramiris, and the deal that had been struck. As he spoke, a wave of understanding, mixed with some awe and unease, washed over those present. The idea of their lord being related to one of the oldest and most powerful demon lords was a staggering piece of information, one that might just redefine Tempest's place in the world should it become public knowledge. But it was the details of the agreement that drew the attention of the wiser and more experienced council members. So, to summarize, Rimuru concluded, "Malim has agreed to help me further refine and grow my power. In exchange, we have agreed to establish diplomatic relations with her domain and teach them our culinary arts. Ramiris will be constructing a labyrinth within Tempest that will serve as our training ground, one where we don't have to worry about causing damage to the environment around us." A moment of silence followed as each individual processed the information presented. Some were naturally concerned, while others, namely Trainee, seemed happy or delighted by the news. "I see," So that's how things are. Rimuru was the first to break the silence of the room. There are many clear benefits to their presence here. But still, having two demon lords within our nation is bound to bring us some unwanted attention. That's true, but their presence here, namely Lady Malim's, is bound to serve as a deterrent just as well, Akatsuki countered. Lady Malim is a well-renowned demon lord across the Western nations and among demon lords alike. Her strength and reputation are nothing to make light of. If word gets out that she's affiliated herself with Tempest, the world could assume she has claimed Tempest for herself, Kaijin pointed out with a concerned frown, which, in turn, would give her greater influence among the demon lords and disrupt the current balance among them. Keat agreed, seeing where Kaijin was going with his point. There's really nothing we can do about her presence, though. She's Lord Rimuru's cousin and family, and she's far too powerful for us to make an enemy out of, Rigard said, a point that no one could refute. From what I observed in my interactions with her, Lady Malim holds no ill will toward Tempest or Lord Rimuru. Her behavior seems consistent with that of a child, carefree and wild. If anything, she came all the way here just to meet Lord Rimuru, Shuna explained. I agree. Malim just came to meet her family, Rimuru said with a small smile. Her character may be wild and chaotic, but her intentions are pure. I'll take responsibility for her actions during her stay here in Tempest, so let's put that matter to rest. Everybody nodded their heads in acceptance. The matter was settled. Lady Malim was here to stay, for now. And what of Lady Ramiris? Rimuru asked as he turned his gaze to meet Rimuru's. Is it wise to have two demon lords within our nation, my lord? Of course it is. Trainee almost shouted swiftly, her composure giving way to mild panic. Seeing all eyes land on her, she coughed into her hand and settled down before speaking once more. Lady Ramiris's labyrinth would be a unique and invaluable asset to Tempest. Not only that, but through Lady Ramiris, Tempest would be able to access the dwelling of spirits and contract elementals. Trainee tried to speak with the calm composure and grace she always had, which she mostly succeeded in, but the way her vines unintentionally wiggled excitedly beside her gave away her true emotions. Rimuru understood why, though. He remembered Trainee telling him that she and her sisters once served under the Queen of Spirits, who was now confirmed to be Ramiris, before they came to the great forest of Jura. It was only natural that she and the other dryads would be more than happy and excited to see her again. Though Rimuru had to admit, he hadn't considered the fact that the monsters of Tempest would be able to contract elemental spirits. In fact, he hadn't thought it possible. Shows how much he knew. If such a thing really was possible, then Ramiris's value to his nation was significantly higher than he had first assumed. She's right, Rimuru affirmed, though he couldn't help but think she was also a little biased. Still, that didn't change the truth of her words. The long-term benefits of having Ramiris stay far outweighed any potential risks. Ramiris's labyrinth offers a safe training ground for everyone, not just me. And the ability to contract spirits is a boon we cannot ignore. We have to consider the fact that she is a demon lord as well, but given her unique situation, I believe she can be trusted. He paused, letting his words sink in. Now, moving on. There is the matter of the delegation that we'll be sending to Malim's domain, Rimuru continued as he leaned forward. This is a crucial step for our nation, and it will define not only how we are perceived by other demon lords, but by the world itself. Therefore, it's not a matter we can take lightly, even if it's just for culinary purposes. A murmur went through the room as those present began to discuss the potential candidates. While they had a general idea of Lady Malim's character, there was no telling just what kind of people followed her, which made this mission both dangerous and highly prestigious. It was an opportunity to cement their nation's standing, and one they could not afford to let pass. Before anyone could offer a suggestion, Shuna placed her teacup down with a soft clink. The sound, while quiet, cut through the murmurs, bringing all eyes to her. She sat with perfect posture, her expression serene yet resolute. "I will go," Shuna stated. It was less of a request and more of a statement. Silence fell over the room as everyone's attention focused on her. Benimaru tensed slightly, looking as though he was about to protest, but he held his tongue out of respect for her position. Shuna wasn't just his little sister anymore. She was also his queen. In public settings, he had to treat her as such. Rimuru frowned, a flicker of concern on his face as he turned to Shuna. Malim herself might seem friendly enough, but the same could not be said about her subordinates. It could be dangerous, Shuna. I'm well aware of the risks, Lord Rimuru, Shuna said as she met his eyes, her gaze steady and unwavering. However, I'm also the most qualified individual for this task. I've overseen the development of our culinary culture alongside our most experienced chefs. And as your wife and queen, my presence would carry more weight. It would show Lady Malim's people our commitment to forming this alliance, as well as the respect we hold for Lady Malim herself. I believe sending the queen may be the best option we have, my lord. Akatsuki spoke up, the pride within him warring with the concern hidden beneath it. Shuna has already gained Lady Malim's favor through her cooking. Her direct involvement would only serve to ensure the success of the delegation. Rimuru knew that they were right. For all the reasons they had pointed out, Shuna was indeed the most qualified individual to lead the delegation. As uncomfortable as he was with sending her away from the safety of Tempest, he knew it was the most logical choice. Besides, he knew Shuna desired to be more than just a figurehead, to be someone who sat idle while she was protected by others. It was why she had been working harder to become stronger as an individual and more capable as a queen. If he denied her this, he would be locking her in the cage she worked so hard to escape from. You're right, Rimuru finally said. Shuna is indeed the best person for the job. Not only does she have the etiquette and knowledge, but she's already in the good books with Malim. But, my lord, Shuna is… Benimaru finally intervened, only to be cut off. I am well capable of protecting myself, brother. Shuna cut in, her voice gaining a sharp edge to it that actually caused Benimaru to flinch slightly. Ho ho ho, Sir Benimaru, Lady Shuna is far more capable than she appears, Hakuru said with an amused laugh. Or are you forgetting that she, too, was my disciple during the days of your youth? Of course not. But still. That's enough, Benimaru. I understand your concerns, I have them too. But Shuna is a capable individual. And it's not like we're sending her alone. She'll have adequate protection, Rimuru said firmly, leaving no room for further discussion. He, better than most, understood Benimaru's concerns, but he also had to consider what Shuna herself wanted as well as the needs of Tempest as a whole. Thus, he couldn't afford to be lenient with Benimaru. Understood. Please forgive my disrespect, Benimaru said with a sigh as he bowed his head. Rimuru nodded his head in understanding. He had no intention of punishing a brother worried about his little sister. Since we've established that Shuna is going, she'll take a small team of some of our best cooks to help her. I'll let you decide who to take on that front, Rimuru said, directing the last part to Shuna in particular. Understood. Leave it to me, Shuna said with a firm nod. As for her escorts, Cheyenne, Ariel, and a few members of the Royal Guard should be more than enough so as to not appear hostile, Rimuru said, to which everyone nodded their heads in agreement. Leave it to me, Lord Rimuru. If any of those scoundrels try anything against Lady Shuna, I'll deal with them accordingly, Cheyenne said as she clenched her fist passionately. Remember, Cheyenne, we're doing this to make friends, not enemies. Fighting should be a last resort. Understood, Rimuru asked sternly. He knew how Cheyenne could be, but he also knew she was more than reliable when it counted, which was why he wasn't hesitant to send her on this mission. Don't worry, Lord Rimuru. I'll be the very definition of restraint and diplomacy, Cheyenne said with a bright smile. Rimuru wasn't too convinced, but he trusted Cheyenne to do her job right. We won't fail, Lord Rimuru, Ariel spoke up with a reassuring smile of her own. We'll make sure the negotiations are a success and that Lady Shuna is protected at all times. Ariel had really grown into her own self since the orc invasion. Her older sister, Melody, had been placed as the leader of the coastal port town, with most of the naiads dwelling there. Their water-based abilities made the environment more natural for them. Not to mention they helped with the fishing and protection of the coasts from powerful sea creatures. A few hundred naiads, led by Ariel, had moved to Rimuru City at Melody's suggestion, a means to deepen relations and show their loyalty. The naiads present had proven to be a formidable fighting force, comparable to even the Kijin. Their weapon specialties included heavy lances, spears, and tridents, though many also showed proficiency with swords, shields, and daggers. Ariel herself fought with a heavyweight lance, a clear sign of the strength behind her mesmerizing features. "Glad to hear it," Rimuru said with a firm nod before continuing. "Malim and I will be escorting you to her domain tomorrow morning to ensure your arrival goes smoothly. We'll take the Tempest Wolves for flight to make things faster. We probably won't stay long, knowing Malim, but it should be enough time for me to assess their character for myself. That aside, after we leave, the rest will be up to you, Shuna." "Understood. You can count on me," Shuna said with a resolute nod. With that, the major topics of the meeting were concluded. What followed was the ironing out of the details pertaining to who would be going, as well as the resources that would be required. When all was said and done, Rimuru dismissed everyone, and they began to stand and file out, chatting away as they did. Rimuru remained seated for a moment longer, his eyes closed in thought of the events that had unfolded in the last 24 hours. Meeting two demon lords in one day had no doubt thrown his plans off the rails. Tempest would become the center of attention much sooner than he planned. It wasn't ideal, but the situation could not be helped. The situation wasn't all bad, though. There was much to be gained from allying with both Malim and Ramiris, and he genuinely wanted to get to know Malim as a family member. Whatever came from this choice, good or bad, he had full confidence that he and his people would be able to handle it. The morning sun had barely crested over the forest's mountains as the selected delegation gathered at the main gates of Rimuru City. The air was crisp, filled with the promise of a new day and the nervous energy of a group preparing to depart. At the forefront was Rimuru himself, adjusting the cuffs of his sleeves. Beside him, Malim was practically vibrating with impatience, levitating a few feet off the ground as if gravity itself couldn't contain her excitement. Ramiris sat atop Rimuru's shoulder, having opted to fly with him rather than the wild Malim. Behind them, Shuna and the rest were just about ready to set off as well. Given that most of the delegation could not fly, it had been decided that the Tempest Wolves would carry them. After their evolution during the Orc War, the Star Wolves and Storm Wolves had acquired the extra skill Skywalk, a technique that allowed them to create invisible footholds by compressing the air beneath their feet, allowing them to stand, walk, or run on air as though they were on the ground. Ranga stood at the front of the pack with Shuna beside him, reveling in the attention she was giving him as she patted his head. Cheyenne and Ariel had already mounted their wolves on either side of Shuna. Likewise, the guards were already on their own wolves, ready to depart at a moment's notice. And lastly were the chefs, who had just finished organizing everything they would need for this journey, such as ingredients, utensils, and the like. These items were stored within the spatial storage of those capable of using the skill or magic. "All right, everybody," Rimuru called out, cutting through the chatter. "Remember, stay in formation, and if anyone needs a break, pass the message along. Finally, it's about time we got going. I was getting tired of waiting. Come on, come on," Malim shouted, unable to contain herself any longer. Without another word, she shot off into the sky, leaving a pink trail of light in her wake. "That girl," Rimuru sighed, shaking his head in exasperation. Shuna giggled behind him, causing his expression to soften. "Well, you heard her. Let's move out." With a collective howl that resonated deep in the chests of all those present, the Tempest Wolves sprang into action. Ranga took the lead, his paws striking the currents of the empty air beneath him as Skywalk engaged. Invisible platforms of condensed air formed beneath the wolves' feet, allowing them to run up into the sky as though they were ascending a grand, invisible staircase. Rimuru watched them ascend for a moment, ensuring everybody was stable, before he allowed his own power to flow. Jet black scales rippled across his skin, curved horns protruding from the top of his head, and large draconic wings burst forth from his backside. With a powerful flap that sent a gust of wind through the clearing, he took to the air, Iris cheering from her perch on his shoulder. The journey was nothing short of breathtaking. Below them, the great forest of Jura spread out like an endless sea of green, teeming with life. But up here, amidst the clouds, the world felt vast and limitless. The Tempest wolves ran with an elegance that defied gravity, their long strides a testament to their endurance, while their riders clutched the fur or reins, eyes wide with the thrill of flight. For many, this was their first time leaving the ground, and the mix of terror and exhilaration was palpable. Rimuru flew alongside Shuna and Ranga, keeping a steady pace that allowed the wolves to conserve energy while still moving rapidly towards Malim's domain. "Are you comfortable, Shuna?" Rimuru asked, his voice carried over the wind by magic. "This is incredible, Rimuru," Shuna replied ecstatically, her hair whipping in the wind and a radiant expression on her face. "To see the world from such a perspective, it really is beautiful." Rimuru couldn't help the grin on his face at her reaction. He remembered feeling the same way when he took to the skies for the first time, shortly after leaving the sealed cave. The rush of the wind, the freedom of flight, and the amazing view from above had all captivated him almost immediately. To this day, he still made it a point to take a flight around the forest once in a while. "I should teach Shuna that flight magic I got from Gelmud," Rimuru thought. He rarely used it himself since he preferred to fly with his wings. It was just more natural to him. But he could think of more than a few people who would benefit from that kind of versatility and maneuverability. The group traveled for a few more hours, crossing mountains and rivers that looked like mere lines on a map from their altitude. Eventually, the forest gave way to rugged, craggy peaks, with the air growing thinner and sharper. "There it is," Malim announced, pointing downwards. Nestled within a massive valley surrounded by sheer cliffs lay their destination, the city of the Forgotten Dragons. It was a stark contrast to the developing, vibrant architecture of Rimuru City. This place felt timeless, carved directly from the gray stone of the mountains. It featured massive stone plazas, a towering temple dedicated to dragon worship built into the mountainside, and simple, sturdy wooden dwellings at the base surrounding the temple. They descended towards the city's entrance, the wolves galloping down the invisible incline until their paws touched the stone pavement. As they landed, a group of people emerged from the temple, clearly having sensed their approach. Leading them were two distinct figures. One was a young man with silver hair and a carefree, almost lazy expression, Hermes. The other was a tall, muscular man with a stern face and the aura of a seasoned warrior, his bald head gleaming under the sun. Midray stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning the group of monsters. His gaze lingered heavily on Rimuru for a moment before shifting to Malim. He bowed deeply, a gesture of absolute reverence. "Welcome back, Lady Malim. We have awaited your return." Rimuru could tell from the moment they landed that this person was exceptionally powerful, despite his attempts to suppress his strength. His ultra instinct told him that Midray was indeed stronger than Rimuru himself, but there was no way to measure just how strong, given his power was currently suppressed for the most part. But even then, his current aura was vastly superior to Rimuru's own subordinates. Hermes bowed as well, though his eyes were busy darting around the diverse group of goblins, Kijin, and wolves with undisguised curiosity. "Welcome back, Malim-sama. You brought quite a crowd this time." "I did." Malim puffed out her chest. "Midray, Hermes, listen up. This is my cousin, Rimuru Tempest, and these are his subordinates from the Jura Tempest Federation." At the word cousin, Midray's head snapped up, his eyes widening as his composure cracked for the first time. "Cousin? Lady Malim, surely you jest. You have no kin save for the—" He trailed off, his eyes widening further as the pieces clicked. He turned his full attention toward Rimuru. Seeing as there was no point in hiding anything, Rimuru stepped forward and introduced himself. "Greetings. My name is Rimuru Tempest, leader of the Jura Tempest Federation and son of the Storm Dragon, Velredia Tempest. Malim tells me that we are family and wants to establish relations between our people, hence our sudden visit." A ripple of shock went through the dragon faithful behind Midray, whispers and murmurs passing through them. Even Hermes dropped his jaw at the revelation. You're kidding." Hermes murmured silently as he covered his mouth with his hand, a bead of sweat forming on his head. "The son of the storm dragon?" Midray whispered as his gaze pierced into Rimuru, as though trying to peel through his suppressed aura and read his true nature. His gaze shifted from Rimuru to Malim, seeing the confirmation in her wide grin. After a moment, he respectfully bowed his head towards Rimuru. "I see. Please forgive my lack of manners. To meet another descendant of the true dragon lineage. I am Father Midray, head priest of the Dragon Faithful, loyal followers and worshippers of Lady Malim. We are honored by your visit, Lord Rimuru." "Please, raise your head," Rimuru said, waving his hand casually. "I didn't come here for formal worship. We're simply here on a friendly visit, and to hopefully establish friendly relations between our peoples. Allow me to also introduce my wife, Rimuru Tempest. And I'm sure you must be acquainted with Demon Lord Ramiris." Shuna bowed her head respectfully in greeting, an act that Midray responded to in kind. "Yo, long time no see, Baldy," Ramiris chirped from Rimuru's shoulder. "Lady Ramiris, always a pleasure to see a friend of Lady Malim's," Midray said with a respectful bow. "I wouldn't go that far," Ramiris muttered lowly so that only Rimuru heard her, causing him to shake his head in amusement. "Please allow me to welcome you to the city of the Forgotten Dragons, home to the Dragon Faithful," Midray said, gesturing towards their home before turning to face the delegation once more. "May I ask what brings such a distinguished delegation to our humble abode? I imagine it must be quite important to have traveled so far." Before Rimuru could get a word out, Malim took center stage once more, hovering right in front of Midray with a wide grin and her hands on her hips. "That's right. It is important. Rimuru and his people are here to teach you guys how to cook." The silence that followed was deafening. All that could be heard was the whisper of the wind as a gentle breeze passed them. The reaction among the Dragon Faithful was surprisingly mixed. Most, especially the younger and female members, seemed genuinely intrigued at the prospect of cooking proper food. But even so, none of them could say this out loud. Rimuru watched as their nervous eyes all turned toward their head priest. As for Midray himself, his face seemed to darken as soon as the word cooking left Malim's mouth. "Cook? My lady," Midray said, the word spoken with a heavy amount of disgust. And yet Malim failed miserably to read the room, going on as if nothing was wrong. "Oh boy," Hermes said, nervously backing away from the head priest. "Yes, cooking," Malim shouted excitedly. "You know, making food taste good. Rimuru's country has the best food ever, and I want to eat it here too. So, Shuna and her team are going to teach you how to make proper meals." Another moment of silence passed before Midray's expression settled into one of hardening resolve. He stood up straighter, his face turning stern. Immediately, Rimuru knew they were up for an uphill battle. "Lady Malim," Midray began, his tone respectful but firm. "With all due respect, we are the Dragon Faithful. We worship the purity of nature and the strength of the dragon bloodline. We consume sustenance as it is provided by the earth, raw, natural, and untainted by fire or excessive seasoning. To indulge in the culinary arts of humans and lower races is frivolous. It distracts from our worship and discipline." Rimuru watched the exchange, noting the immediate deflation in Malim's posture. She didn't argue back immediately, likely used to Midray's stubborn adherence to tradition. The other Dragon Faithful seemed just as deflated or resigned. It appeared Midray, and perhaps the older members of the Dragon Faithful, were the only ones who truly believed in what he was saying. "But it's really tasty," Malim mumbled, looking at the ground. Despite her strength and power, Malim still had the mindset of a child more than half the time. Midray was a stern and unyielding adult figure, something she couldn't easily counter, especially since she didn't want to resort to tantrums or violence against her own followers. "Taste is a fleeting pleasure of the flesh," Midray lectured, closing his eyes. "We require strength and vitality. Raw ingredients provide the purest form of energy. We have no need for such things here. The atmosphere grew awkward. Cheyenne's eyebrow twitched, her hand clenching into a fist, clearly offended that her lord's generous offer was being spurned by this stubborn priest. A sharp glance from Rimuru kept her in check, however. This wasn't an issue that could be resolved with fists or swords. Rimuru was about to step in to mediate when soft footsteps echoed on the stone. Shuna stepped forward, moving past Rimuru and Malim until she stood directly before the towering dragon-newt priest. She looked tiny compared to him, but her presence was undeniable. "Father Midray," Shuna called out, her voice gentle but carrying a core of steel. Midray opened his eyes and looked down at the Kijin queen, immediately taking note of the resolve and displeasure in her eyes. "Lady Shuna, I mean no disrespect to you and your people, but I simply cannot allow this. Our traditions are important," Shuna interrupted softly. "They ground us and remind us of who we are and where we came from. But tell me, Sir Midray, what is the primary duty of the dragon faithful?" Midray blinked, surprised by the question. "To worship the dragon lords and, above all, to serve and revere Lady Malim." "To serve her," Shuna repeated. She gestured gracefully toward Malim, who was currently looking at the ground with a kicked puppy expression that was heartbreaking to witness. It was a look that didn't belong to one of the most powerful beings in this world. "Look at your goddess, Father Midray. Does she look happy? Does she look satisfied?" Midray glanced towards Malim for a moment, his stern expression faltering slightly at her rather pathetic sight. "You say you serve her," Shuna continued, her voice gaining strength. "But is it true service to force your own ideals of austerity upon her? Lady Malim is a being of immense power, yes, but she also feels joy, sadness, and hunger. Is it not the duty of the faithful to ensure their deity is content? To turn a blind eye to her desires? To deny her the simple joy of a delicious meal because of your interpretation of tradition? Is that not arrogance?" "Arrogance." Midray stiffened as if physically struck, before frowning at the implications. Rimuru tensed at the sensed hostility, but didn't move. He trusted Shuna to know what she was doing. "It is for her strength. Lady Malim is among the strongest in this world." Shuna interrupted once more, her voice firm and her eyes unyielding. "Does eating a delicious meal make her weak? Does smiling at a sweet treat dull her power?" she asked challengingly, daring Midray to say otherwise. Midray had no counter-argument. He, more than most, understood the basis of Malim's power, having been on the receiving end of it multiple times in his life, but he knew he could never fully comprehend the true extent of it. "Look at her," Shuna said once more. Midray turned towards Malim, and this time the pink-haired demon lord was looking at the head priest with glistening, wide, hopeful eyes. "She travels around the world seeking excitement because her home, this home you fervently maintain for her, offers her none. Is that the worship she deserves? To be strong, but bored and unsatisfied?" As Midray looked at Malim, her sky-blue eyes peeking at him through her bangs, it suddenly dawned on him. How often did Lady Malim visit the city? How often did she abruptly leave? And when she did leave, it was often for far longer than she stayed. How often did she complain about the food? Now that Midray thought about it, she was never truly pleased with their offerings. Yet she took them anyway since they came from a place of goodwill. He thought he had been guiding her, but perhaps... Midray started only to stop. His expression was one of deep thought and confusion. "We only wish to honor her nature as a dragonoid." "Dragon's feast, Father Midray," Shuna said with a smile. "My husband is a dragon, and like Lady Malim, he's a direct descendant of true dragons, and yet he enjoys the wonders of food in all their forms. Why shouldn't Lady Malim?" Midray could only hum in response. After a moment, the bald priest let out a long sigh, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Perhaps I have been too stuck in my ways." With a deep breath, he straightened his posture once more. "If this is Lady Malim's wish, then we will allow a demonstration." A brilliant smile blossomed onto Malim's face bright enough to rival the sun itself. Really? You mean it, Midray? Yes, Lady Malim. Midray bowed his head, though a trace of reluctance still clung to his expression. While traditions may be important, we cannot allow them to get in the way of our service to you. Yay! Midray, you're the best! Malim shouted gleefully as she leapt into the air. Within another second, her form blitzed right in front of Shuna, grabbing onto her hands. And you were amazing too, Shuna. I've never seen someone change Midray's mind like that. No kidding. Father Midray can be a bit tense. But you handled him really well, Lady Shuna. Hermes spoke up nervously, a newfound respect forming for the Kijin Queen. And he wasn't the only one. Many of the Dragon Faithful seemed impressed by her resolve and the way she stood up to him. There's no need to thank me, Lady Malim, Shuna said with a bright smile. I merely said what needed to be said. Well, you said it well. Now I not only get to eat good food at home, but the people here can enjoy it too, Malim said with a wide grin. Well, if that's the case, then it's best not to keep them waiting any further, Shuna said as she clapped her hands in front of her. Malim responding with an enthusiastic, right? She then turned towards Hermes. If you could point us to an appropriate workspace, we'll get started right away. Of course. Hermes snapped to attention. Please follow us. We have a communal hearth that we use from time to time. With permission granted and the Dragon Faithful leading the way, the Tempestians sprang into action. You have a formidable wife, Lord Rimuru, Midray said to Rimuru, who had stepped up beside him. His tone was grudgingly respectful as both of them watched his people lead the Tempestians into their sacred lands. She is indeed, Rimuru said with a proud and endearing smile. She has a gentle strength to her that never ceases to amaze me. The area they were given was by no means the kitchen they were used to back home, but it was a workable space. The chefs immediately began unloading the equipment from their spatial storage pockets. Portable stoves, polished tables, cooking equipment, and crates of high-quality ingredients all appeared and were organized accordingly. The Dragon Faithful could only watch in awe as the Tempestians delved into their cooking, the rich smell of savory meats and spices soon filling the air. An hour later, the central plaza of the City of the Forgotten Dragons was completely transformed. The simple stone tables were laden with a feast unlike anything the Dragon Faithful had ever seen. There were plates of grilled fish, seasoned with herbs from the forest and glazed with a savory sauce that gleamed in the sunlight. Bowls of hearty stew, rich with root vegetables and tender meat, released steam with an aroma so intoxicating that many of the younger faithful were literally drooling. There were baskets of freshly baked bread, still warm, and colorful salads dressed in light vinaigrettes. The most important dish, however, was placed directly in front of Midray. The piece de resistance. It was a seemingly simple dish, a bowl of white rice topped with a perfectly grilled steak, a raw egg yolk nestled in the center, and a drizzle of a special sauce on the surface, courtesy of Shuna. It was a tempura don of sorts. Father Midray, please give this a try. If this does not meet your expectations, then we won't try to persuade you and your people any further, Shuna said, gesturing towards the hot meal in front of the dragon priest. Midray stared at the bowl. The steam rose, carrying a scent so profound it seemed to bypass his nose and speak directly to his stomach. It looked unnatural to him, cooked, altered, and yet, the aroma itself drew him closer than any raw meal ever had. I only do this for Lady Malim's sake, Midray muttered. Reluctantly, he picked up the spoon, took a scoop of the rice, meat, and egg, and placed it in his mouth. Immediately, his eyes went wide. The flavors exploded on his tongue. Savory, sweet, rich, and comforting. It was a symphony of taste unlike anything he had ever experienced in his long life. Tears welled up in his eyes, spilling down his cheeks. What is this? This spoonful alone had more flavor than any vegetable I've eaten in my entire life, Midray stammered, his voice trembling in awe from the new experience. The flavor, the texture, the way it melts in your mouth and warms one's soul. His gaze then shifted towards Malim, who was happily devouring her own bowl. He had never seen her eat any of the vegetables they offered with such joy. To think we deprived Lady Malim of such joy for so long. I am truly ashamed of myself. It's okay, Midray. Malim chirped with a mouthful of food. Now you know. And we can eat like this all the time now. Right? Midray wiped his tears and bowed to Rimuru and Shuna. Lord Rimuru, Lady Shuna, you have opened my eyes. We have much to learn from you if we hope to meet Lady Malim's expectations. Rimuru and Shuna turned towards each other and smiled. It seemed their objective had been an overwhelming success. Watching the dragon faithful tentatively try the food, their faces lighting up in delight, was a small victory, but one that would go a long way in establishing strong relations between Tempest and Malim's followers. And all of this was only made possible because of Shuna. Rimuru thought. She had managed to bridge the gap between Malim and her people, not through violence and action, but through sheer resolve and diplomacy. As the feast continued in high spirits, the initial awkwardness between the two groups completely dissolved into a comfortable atmosphere. Cheyenne was busy ensuring that Rimuru's plate was never empty, acting the part of the diligent, if slightly overwhelming, attendant. Half the time, however, Malim ended up taking some of Rimuru's plates, which resulted in the two of them quarreling. Ramiris had long since eaten her fill and was seated on a tiny chair with a slightly bloated stomach and a satisfied expression on her face. Meanwhile, Midray was currently engaged in discussion with Shuna regarding their stay for the foreseeable future and their culinary education. Rimuru watched all this with a content smile, taking a sip of the fruit juice that had been served. It was a good day. They had secured an alliance, broadened the horizons of the Dragon Faithful, and made Malim's home much more welcoming for her. Lady Malim, Midray spoke up, turning away from Shuna for a moment. His expression turned slightly serious, as though remembering something. In the excitement of your return and this revelation regarding cuisine, I nearly forgot to report a significant matter. Malim looked up, a skewer of meat hanging from her mouth. HM? WHFF ish it, Mifre? She gulped the food down in one go. What is it, Midray? We had another guest a few days ago, Midray stated, his tone carrying a weight felt by those in his immediate proximity. Lord Dino arrived at the Forgotten City shortly before your return. Dino? What's that lazy bum doing all the way out here? Ramiris asked as she buzzed up from the table and hovered right in front of Midray's face. Even Malim paused another fork of meat just short of her mouth, blinking in interest at the revelation. Another friend of yours? Rimuru asked. Based on the way both Ramiris and Malim reacted, and the way Midray called him Lord, Rimuru already had an idea. Yup, he's another demon lord, Malim explained, waving the fork of meat dismissively. He's known as the Sleeping Ruler, and he's pretty strong compared to some demon lords. But he never goes anywhere or does anything. He just sleeps all day and complains about everything when he's awake. That's right. The guy just lounges around in other people's domains since he doesn't have his own, and then he just sleeps and eats the entire time. He's the personification of a lazy bum. Ramiris added her 2 cents before turning to Midray once more. I bet he finally got kicked out by de Gruel. That's why he came all the way here. He did not appear to be troubled or under duress, Midray replied thoughtfully. He merely claimed that he was looking for a quiet place to stay and nap for a while. I offered him a guest room in the temple and he has not emerged since. That sounds like him, Malim said with a casual laugh. I swear, that guy could sleep through a meteor shower and then some. Just as the words left Malim's mouth, a sound cut through the chatter of the plaza. A large, drawn-out, and overly exaggerated yawn that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Yeo, man, what's with all the racket out here? A guy can't even get a decent week's worth of sleep without everyone shouting. The chatter in the plaza died down instantly. All eyes turned towards the temple entrance where the voice had originated. Shuffling down the steps was a youthful man with purple-silver hair and dull gray-blue eyes that clearly had bags under them. He wore a slightly loose, long-sleeved purple shirt, black trousers, white pauldrons, and a green cloak. His posture was so slouched it was a miracle he was standing upright at all. He scratched his stomach as he descended the stairs with a slowness that was almost painful to watch. However, as he reached the bottom, his nose suddenly twitched. Slowly, Dino's eyes opened just a fraction wider. He locked onto the feast laid out before him. The grilled meats, the stews, the bread, the sweets. "No way," Dino muttered, his voice taking on a whining tone. "You guys are actually eating real food? The one time I decide to crash here, you guys finally break those boring traditions." He walked up to the main table, ignoring the stunned looks of the Tempestians and the bowed heads of the dragon faithful. He picked up a piece of the grilled fish from a platter, inspected it for a moment, and tossed it into his mouth, completely ignoring those in front of him. "It's actually good," Dino complained, chewing enthusiastically. "Midray, you old stiff. Why didn't you wake me? I've been eating raw radishes and cabbages for 3 days straight because I've been too lazy to go hunting. This is cruel, you know? Keeping all the good stuff from an honored guest." "Lord Dino, we did not wish to disturb your rest," Midray replied with a sweat drop, not bothering to stop Dino as he took another skewer. "Hey, what are the rest of us? Just chopped liver you can ignore," Ramiris shouted in agitation as she flew right into Dino's face, having had enough of being ignored. "Ramiris? What are you doing here? Aren't you far from your labyrinth?" Dino asked casually, only mildly surprised by her presence in Malim's domain. It was only then that he finally acknowledged everyone else sitting at the table. His eyes lazily drifted between each individual. He wasn't surprised to see Malim. Her loud voice had been what roused him from his slumber in the first place. Next came Shuna. His gaze paused for a second, as if appreciating her presence before moving on. Next came Cheyenne, who stood close to Shuna and seemed a bit tense. Dino didn't seem the least bit bothered by her wary gaze before moving on. Finally, his gaze landed on Rimuru, and there it stopped. The lazy, half-lidded expression that had defined Dino from the moment he walked down the stairs vanished in an instant. The skewer of meat he had been holding slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against the stone table, but Dino didn't even seem to notice. His eyes widened momentarily before narrowing as they locked onto Rimuru. The air in the plaza suddenly became heavier, suffocatingly so. Hey, is this supposed to be some kind of joke?" Dino asked, his eyes focused solely on Rimuru. His voice carried none of the exhaustion and laziness it had before. Instead, it sounded cold and sharp, cutting through whatever lingered of the previous jovial atmosphere like a knife through butter. "Is there a problem?" Rimuru asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the sudden spike in tension and the hostility he felt coming from Dino. Dino didn't answer immediately. He didn't blink, breathe, or even twitch. His gaze focused entirely on Rimuru as if attempting to pierce his very soul. After a moment, his eyes narrowed further, and the hostility Rimuru sensed grew significantly. "That aura? Your appearance? Who the hell do you think you are? Walking around with his face?" Dino's voice dropped an octave. The air around him shimmered slightly as his suppressed aura manifested. His oppressive presence caused the weaker monsters and dragon faithful to either pass out or collapse to their knees, gasping for air. Rimuru didn't flinch, though his body tensed slightly, his instincts warning him of the dangerous presence before him. He didn't know what had brought on this level of hostility, but he would rather not fight a demon lord today if he could help it. "My name is Rimuru Tempest. Is there a problem with my face?" "Rimuru Tempest." Dino repeated the name slowly, as if tasting poison. "Never heard of you. So why don't you do me a favor and—" Warning. Hostile intent critical. Attack imminent. There was no build-up, no gathering of power, no shouting of technique names. One moment Dino was standing on the opposite side of the large stone table. The next he was suddenly behind Rimuru. A massive greatsword materialized in his hand, already swinging down in a vicious arc aimed directly at Rimuru's neck. Rimuru's body was already moving long before his mind could even process the threat. His ultra instinct reacting perfectly to the perceived danger. He drew his katana, meeting Dino's strike with a shower of sparks and a shockwave that shattered the ground beneath him. His feet sank into the stone floor up to his ankles from the sheer weight of the attack. "Just die,"